Coming up in this episode.
If the economy crashes, it's going to suck. But if the ecosystem crashes, it's all over. So I think that connection to nature, to land, has really been stripped away recently. And it's just a side effect of hunting that I feel so connected to the land that I want to be a good steward of it. I feel like it's my home.
You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Here for the Truth. I'm Joel Rafidi. I've got my co-host Yerasimos with me as always. I hope you all listening had a beautiful Christmas with family, with loved ones, or just doing whatever it is that you do. I hope you had some time to just experience the gratitude and the delights in being who you are and in being human. And here we are again with Bruce McGlenn joining us today. Yerasimos went on a little hunting adventure with Bruce and one of his courses sometime earlier this year. And it was awesome to get to sit down with Bruce and really just dive into hunting and also the greater metaphorical and psychological impact and threads that can be pulled and gleaned from this topic.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great conversation. I have the utmost respect for Bruce. As I mentioned in episode, I had an amazing time at his Awaken the Hunter course, which is truly a holistic education on people that are more interested in connecting with the land and learning about the hunt. And so I think people that are interested in this subject, or even those of you that maybe don't know much about it, they can get a lot of value out of it. Bruce is a really deep human, and he has much lived experience around this, being third generation hunter. So yeah, and he's got some amazing stories that he shares at the end of this podcast, which are pretty epic.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. What are you grateful for this Christmas, bro?
Honestly, man, I'm really grateful for you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm grateful for who you are. I'm grateful for what we've created. I'm grateful for everything that you do. I'm grateful to have you as a friend. Yeah, I'm grateful for that, and obviously the other usual stuff. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for our home, for our animals. I'm grateful for our community that we've built in Friends of the Truth. Such an incredible group of people, these individuals from all around the world that find us, that find us however they find us, whether through the podcast, through social media, through referral. And yeah, I'm actually amazed. Like, these are people that I care deeply about, and and it just goes to show the beauty of technology, because it's so easy to, and I know we talk about this often on our podcast, it's so easy to be like, the technocracy, AI, they're coming to get us. And yet, what beauty comes from it, and what relationships are built through technology. And so, I wouldn't have it any other way. And so, yeah, I think those are the main things I'm grateful for. And I want to say I'm really grateful to have my mom living with us, to really have her around every day and to see her every day. I don't know how many more years I'm going to have with her. And so it's really, really special. So yeah.
That's sweet, man. I'm grateful for you too, bro. Obviously, you know how much you mean to me. You're my homie. We built so much together. And especially, man, like, having lived abroad now for 3 years and, not having instant access to family and close friends all the time. It's been meaningful, bro, to have this relationship continue to support and, I guess, carry me through times and phases in my life as we traverse all of it. And getting emotional now, but that's all right. It's such an interesting period of time, man. It really is. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's just from the mere fact that the entire collective consciousness slows down a bit or turns a little bit more inward, or maybe it's an astrological connotation, or maybe it comes down to like the heart season from the source cards. But it definitely is like just a period of time where, it feels like I want to retreat inward more. Obviously, I would say, astrologically, the winter solstice would play a role in that, the withdrawal of the sun, things of that nature, etc. But yeah, it's like just thinking and contemplating on, being able to, I guess, cultivate more of these energies even throughout the year as well, when so much of our actions and our thoughts are dominated by, going and going and going, so to speak. But
Dude, we got to save some of this for our final episode of the year that we're going to record. Okay.
That's true. That's true. Which is going to be released in the new year, but
Yeah.
stay tuned for that. All right, I'll keep it at that. Friends of the Truth, guys, we're officially at tier 3 pricing. And again, there's limited subscriptions on this tier. And the pricing of Friends of the Truth is going to continue to go up until we hit our member cap of 200 members, from which point the community is going to be locked. And we're not going to have any more intakes unless someone leaves. So if you feel the call, if you resonate with these conversations, if you want to connect with us on a deeper level, if you want to be privy to just the most incredible community that, you know, encompasses the array of both depth and humor, and we have 6 or 7 calls a month where we get to connect and just converse over some incredible topics, then please join us inside Friends of the Truth at hereforthetruth.com/FOTT. Bruce McGlenn is the founder of and lead instructor at Human Nature Hunting, a program designed to awaken our innate senses through conscious hunting and gathering by tapping into the fundamental wisdom of our ancestors and building the foundational skills and confidence to think and live like a hunter. It emphasizes our relationship to the earth, our ecosystem, our food, and life and death. It is an exploration of our primal past and what it means to be human. And it's an invitation to step out of our comfort zone and to be open to seeing things from a new perspective. Bruce has 40 years of hunting experience in the Pacific Northwest, passed down from his father, who learned from his father. Hunting has been a way of life for him from the beginning, and he sees as much importance in the experiences and personal growth gained from hunting as he does as a healthy source of food and connection to nature. He's a certified master hunter and shooting instructor, a committed steward of the land and wildlife, primarily due to his understanding and appreciation of our ecosystem from engaging in it as a participant, a hunter. His desire to help heal and strengthen the human nature connection is what inspires him to teach and pass on his skills so others can experience the journey of the hunt with confidence and a renewed sense of connection to place. Bruce, welcome to Here for the Truth.
Thank you, Joel. Nice to meet you, and good to see you again, Yerasimos.
Yeah, for our listeners, I just want to start this off by saying that this past June, I had the pleasure and the honor of spending 4 or 5 days with Bruce and his team and several other members of the Awaken the Hunter cohort that you teach, this class in Washington, which is a pretty amazing holistic course on hunting that Bruce leads, and it was definitely super impactful. I'm sure we'll get into it, but yeah, really excited to have you here and hear more of your story and get into this topic more deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hunting is such a fascinating topic. On the surface, it's like, just a bunch of rednecks out chasing animals and drinking beer or whatever. But the other side of that is that it covers such a broad spectrum of thoughts and beliefs and history and you name it. And I always enjoy an opportunity to kind of dig a little deeper into these topics because I think it deserves a little bit more of a look than what the surface level gives it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll come in and say I've got little to no hunting experience, but I'm definitely excited about the connections that can be bridged here in this conversation. Man, one way we always like to kick these off is we want to kind of really dig deep into your personal hero's journey, like how you came along this path and some of the major rites of passage that have catalyzed your ongoing transformation in terms of your relationship to hunting and, you know, your growth, etc. So where does the story begin for Bruce, basically?
Well, I was born. Actually, I mean, my first memory of hunting and almost anything was when I was 3 years old on my dad's shoulders. We were hunting pheasants in the Columbia Basin in central Washington. And I partly remember that because we had a little voice recorder. My older brother and sister and I would interview each other, and they interviewed me after I got home from this hunt. And I told this story of riding on his shoulders and a rooster flushing and him shooting, and I'm holding onto his hair, trying not to fall off, and no ear protection, no seat belts, nothing back then. And it left quite an impression. And I mean, hunting seasons are fairly short, in the year. So it's not like we're doing this all year long. And we were never really fanatics about it, but it was just something we did. My dad grew up hunting he taught us to hunt. For some reason, it stuck with me a little bit more. He and I went on many one-day hunting trips in the fall over the years growing up. I started hunting on my own when I was 9 and went to University of Washington, got a civil engineering degree. I was kind of getting into the mainstream workforce, and I went to work at an engineering firm and was doing good work, doing structural design on high rises and working with good people. But I kept thinking about getting back to the land and the feelings I was having when I was on the land, and we were going back to Montana more and more in those years. This is probably 20 years ago now, where my dad was from, and a typical trip, we'd drive to the end of the road, pack our gear or sled it in about 4 miles up into the mountains to about 8,000 feet, set up camp, a wall tent and a wood stove and our cooking gear and living essentials and hunting gear, and we just hunt for 2 weeks. And part of that was the challenge of being off grid and just immersed in nature. But during those hunts, I realized there was something very unique happening. It was requiring me to really step out of the domesticated life and into a more wild life, and tap into my innate senses and intuition, and just really paying attention to what was going around me, and feeling very grounded. And this was all, whether or not I shot something. I mean, 99.9% of a 2-week hunting trip like this is just being out there and hunting. And of course, when you shoot something or someone in your party shoots something, it's a bonus. You get some good, meat for the freezer. But the act of hunting, I realized, was just this totally different, unique experience that I wasn't getting anywhere else in my daily or professional life. And I thought, if I could figure out a way to bottle and share this, I think it would be valuable for people on all levels, to think and feel and act like a hunter. But it's not that easy. And so I eventually came around to the idea of, training people to get out and have these experiences, because I felt it was so valuable. And I mean, just maybe to add on to that a little bit, along the years of these hunts, after I started the hunting program, I was out on another hunt. I think it was right around the pandemic year, and we had a smaller group with us that year. And I was out. I mean, I always go into the backcountry with people I trust and can count on and enjoy being with. And I like to wander off by myself during the day and hunt. It's just easier. You can follow your gut. You can stop. You can take a turn this way or that way, sort of choose your own adventure. You don't have to sit there and debate it with somebody else on what to do. You just go, and you just follow your instinct truly and purely. And I was hunting, and it just kind of hit me like, whatever it is I'm doing right now, I just feel totally human and totally alive. And whatever I can do to serve this feeling, I think is a good use of my time and energy. And so it felt like I was on the right track in terms of trying to give people this opportunity to have these experiences.
Yeah, it's amazing. What did you learn, like, from your grandfather and your father that, like, has helped guide you? Obviously there's, like, the act of the hunt, but, like, you talk about it from such a deep primal way, in a philosophical kind of way about you. Like, how did your father and grandfather approach hunting? Was it in a similar way? Where are you guys similar? Where maybe are you different?
Well, I unfortunately never had a chance to meet my grandfather. He instilled these things in my father, who taught me. That's a good question. I think, I really appreciate my dad's approach to teaching me all about this, because it was never about, we got to get our limits, we got to maximize this, we got to stay out until the bitter end. It was about the adventure, and it was about little things along the way and what we were finding. One day we stopped and he showed me what an owl pellet was, which is, if you know what that is, it's an owl eats a mouse and then digests it and regurgitates a little pellet with a bunch of bones and hair that they can't digest, and it drops under the tree where they've been roosting and or feeding. And it was just like a little science lesson, and it had nothing to do with the hunt, but it was this kind of stuff all the time. And it was just about being out there, and he gave me a lot of freedom to explore. And you can imagine, me being 9 years old and walking around with my own shotgun. That's a lot of responsibility, and it's a lot of trust, I guess, on his part that he's done what he needs to so that I'm safe. And so yeah, I think I really appreciated his approach. I mean, it was the same with salmon fishing and other things. It was always an enjoyable experience, and it was never about the harvest or maximizing our limit or whatever. And
Yeah.
and like I said, for some reason it took a little bit more deeper with me than it did my brother and sister, who also have done some hunting.
Yeah.
But whether that's a genetic thing or who knows.
What are some of the through lines that you've discovered when it comes to, like, I guess, hunting as a microcosm for life, or the way that you live life? Like, what are some of the lessons that translate universally to how you lead your life?
Well, my wife and I talk a little bit about this at times, the difference between hunting and gathering. And just as a side note, we can talk about this later. My wife, Sarah, was a vegetarian for 12 years when we met, which was an interesting story. And she's since has started hunting with me and eating wild meat. But that's another story. But the difference between hunting and gathering, I think, metaphorically, sometimes I see gathering as like gathering information, researching, trying to make a decision and researching all the options and until you're confused at everything out there and don't know which, up from down. And versus hunting, in my experience of being out there, is just more of kind of letting go of everything and just having a plan and being prepared, but striking out into the unknown with sort of an objective, but not a really strict objective, and just feeling my way and letting my intuition guide me and my curiosity. I feel like there's something down there in that draw. I'm going to go down there, even though it doesn't make sense. I'm going to go down there and check it out. And what do I have to lose? And hunting is such a great testing ground for that, especially if you're out on your own. There's nobody watching you or judging you. And so it's a way to practice just being grounded, present, and kind of letting your intuition guide you through life. And it is a practice.
Yeah. When were you first, like, in the backcountry alone and wandering? Were you 9 then? Like, were you just completely, like, let off to go on your own with a shotgun in hand and nobody else in sight? Or did that come later on?
Well, I don't know, back then, I think now there are probably laws about not letting youths hunt on their own. There were a few times when like one in particular when I was 9, and we were bird hunting and staying at a friend's place, and my dad had forgotten something back at where we stayed. I think his shotgun. I had mine, so he dropped me off at a stubble field with our black lab Charlie, and he took off and came back in a couple hours because it was a bit of a drive, and I was just out there. I shot a few birds and working with a dog, and so there was some of that, but it wasn't until I think it wasn't until later that we got into these more in-depth backcountry trips that required a lot more horsepower, I guess, to get in there and survive and do well. So to answer your question, there was a lot of hunting together, as I was young. It was probably later in teenage years, that I was doing stuff on my own.
Yeah. Do you feel like how do you feel like having hunting as a shared experience either impacted or enhanced even your relationship with your father? Because I think we live in a world now where many sons you feel kind of lost and didn't have many real visceral shared experiences with dad, so to speak. So like, how do you relate to father as a result of him guiding you through hunting?
Oh, it kind of goes back to that, what I was saying earlier about his approach to teaching this. And I think because of his approach and, his way of just dealing with the world, it was easy for us to get out there and work together. And over the years and hunts, we kind of learned to communicate without having to talk so much. We learned each other's patterns and ways of moving. And, um, we might have done a dozen one day or weekend bird hunts in a season, which is part of October through the end of the year, a couple, 3 months. So it's a lot of trips. And it was just, we'd wrap up the week, throw our gear together, get a few hours of sleep Friday night, and leave at 3 a.m. in the morning to drive over the pass and get first light. And um, so it's a lot of time together and just philosophizing. But just the time together, I think, was special. And it wasn't like so structured. It was just being together, being in nature, um, helping each other, learning from each other, supporting each other. And I think it was a pretty unique opportunity, you know, compared to some of my other friends.
We had a little bit of a
How's that?
technical, yeah, good. We had a little technical snafu there, but the question that I'd asked, which you may still remember, but just like your young daughter's experience with this. I know you had your experiences with your father, but now your daughter's young and she's obviously around you. You're teaching this class. She's around animals that are, that are being killed. Like what's her, experience of that, and how do you approach that with her? Because how old is she now?
Just two and a half.
Okay.
So she had a lot of exposure primarily due to running these courses. And as you know, we would work with a real animal and dispatch a goat in your case, and worked on field dressing and skinning and butchering it. And she often would wander up and see what was going on and touch the thing. And we just told her from day one, like, she asked what it is. This is a dead goat, and we're going to eat this later. And it was really no big deal. I mean, and you know, she, it just it was just normal, I guess. As opposed to, say, like sheltering kids early on and well into growing up, like death is a bad thing, and we don't want you to see this, and we don't want you to know that this animal is dying so that you can eat it when it turns up in the grocery store wrapped in plastic. And then years later, kind of having this realization, that's probably why people turn to vegetarianism, because they think it's cruel and unusual, and it kind of is in the commercial arena. But it's been fascinating to see just from day one, like what's normal, and it's probably similar to what happens with kids that grow up on farms and see this all the time.
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah, it was impactful for me, even just witnessing it, just being there. And then, like, we dragged the goat to the place where we were going to field dress, and then just to see her come there and like kind of hold the, like, to grab the goat's like hoof while the work was happening, like, was it like made a mark on me, because it's not something you normally see, or at least I don't normally see. Um, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, when I think about my upbringing and having grown up in Bellevue, suburb of Seattle, which is not known for its hunters, and going to a school, there might have been a couple of other hunters in the school of, several hundred, maybe close to 1,000 students. And a lot of kids would kind of tease me about being Bambi killer, because that was their experience of, hunting. Walt Disney's Bambi, where the hunter was the antagonist, and they didn't know anything else about it. And so and not only that, I mean, the premise of the story, it was not hunting, it was illegal poaching, because you can't hunt at the time of year that this story was happening. So it was just totally all thrown out. And then, this kind of gets into a bigger picture of where, why are things like this, and how did it change? And after, 2 million years of humans and our ancestors hunting and gathering and living on the land, and then in the last 5 or 10,000 years, agriculture has cropped up, and then recently the Industrial Revolution, and just all this extraction of pulling people out of these processes. And I've talked to a few archaeologists over the years, and they have kind of a similar sentiment. Like, the end of the hunter-gatherer era was sort of like the beginning of the end of a good life. Getting off kind of on a tangent there, but
well, can you talk about that more? Like, what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, there's been some studies on how much, like, free time or leisurely time that hunters and gatherers have. And there are still some people that are living more off the land like that. And they're not spending 40 hours a week or more making money so they can pay a mortgage and buy groceries. They're spending like half that much time to secure what they need for food and shelter. And then they've got the other half to be with their family, or, make music or art or whatever. So it's, we've kind of cornered ourselves, I think, a little bit into this new paradigm of having to be inserted, part of the matrix or whatever a worker bee, rather than just experiencing that freedom that we had.
Yeah. How do you think, if you can extrapolate on it, that like the disconnection from nature that we've experienced since like the Industrial Revolution, factory farming, etc., how do you think that has led to kind of, I guess, the psychological degradation of man? Because I mean, things seem so complex to be happening in one's head today. It's like a lot more complex, whereas it seems as though there was a simplicity to how we used to relate to ourselves and our lives previously.
Yeah. It's it's tough. I mean, it kind of begs the question, like, what do we have to gain from hunting? Or the flip side of that coin is, what do we have to lose if hunting goes away? And that's not an easy question to answer. Aldo Leopold, who's a conservationist and ecologist, he talked about this idea of intelligent tinkering. He said, the first sign of intelligent tinkering is that you don't pull out a piece and throw it away just because you feel like you don't understand that piece or you don't like it. If the whole is good, the parts that make up the whole must contribute to that wholeness and that goodness. And in a way, I think hunting is a piece that's been pulled out and almost thrown away. And we have to ask ourselves, like, what's going on here? What is it about the possibility of the potential of hunting that might connect us to the land, to our food, to the ecosystem, that has been happening for eons? And if we just pull it out suddenly and shift gears without really evolving over a long period of time, what does that mean? And a lot of people that come to the course, they're kind of feeling burnt out. They're talking about, I sit in front of a computer all day and I punch my time and I get money transferred to me digitally, which then gets used to buy groceries and pay for housing. And I don't feel like I'm providing. I mean, I'm providing money, but I'm not like providing. And I think that's partly what's missing. Just this feeling, this act of being engaged in the bigger, broader ecosystem, and going out and bringing home the bacon, more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like in this, this hyper digitized world, even though, obviously we provide with our minds, with our labor, with our work, with ideas, etc. Maybe there's a primal disconnect, in terms of within us, like in terms of the way that we've provided for, like you're saying, millions of years, which man is kind of now disconnected from. What are some of the other like before and after, I guess, experiences of the people that take the courses that you've noticed?
Well, we get a lot of messages and notes and follow-up messages from folks that have actually gone out and hunted, and from really across the board. I mean, so for example, one guy started hunting after the course and showed up at a trailhead that he had done a little research on, looked at maps, and ended up uh, meeting another hunter there, and they got to talking and kind of hit it off, and they planned some more hunts together and became good friends. And then he was living in California and working in uh, apparel of some sort, like clothing design or something. And there was like one job in Montana that fit the bill for what he did. And he called the company because he kind of wanted to move to Montana, and he had an interview with someone there and who was also a hunter. And when they realized they were both hunters, they talked for 2 hours about hunting and never really talked about the job. But needless to say, he got the job, moved to Montana, and he said none of this would have happened had I not started hunting. It's just these weird little tangents and things that pop up. And other people write in and say that they've just kind of built on the foundation that we provided, and had some really amazing hunts and wanted to share their successes with us, and uh, you know experiences with their families. I think some people also come to the course not having an intention to go hunting, and we try to design it in a way that if that's the case, there's still value in the experience of these 5 days at a course, because they get to kind of understand what hunting is all about, where their food comes from, and kind of see things from a different perspective. And like an example would be this past year, a fellow signed up, and he was saying, would it be okay if my wife came out and just like had meals with us, and she would go off and journal during the day or do some nature walks? And it's like, yeah, we don't do that very often, but we'll figure it out, and anyway, she showed up, sat with us for the opening introduction and sort of a guided imagery and meditation. And she's like, what are we doing meditating at a hunting school? This doesn't make any sense. And long story short, she ended up attending the entire course with us. And she had a fear of blood and guts. She had a fear of guns and firearms, and she overcame all that stuff and had her hands in the animal and was shooting, and went home and wrote a 20-page paper about her transformative experience of just doing this stuff. So that's those sorts of things that we're trying to tap into. It's just like, what do we not even know we're missing here, and why is it important that we kind of hold on to this way of life?
Yeah. Well, I think, people can come into it with preconceived notions, like you said. When people think of hunting, they go, oh, some redneck that like is just killing animals for their trophies to put on on their walls, and yet it is something so much deeper. And, I've shared this, I think, when I wrote an article for our blog, this past year, I share that obviously meeting you and connecting with you and like having our late night conversations, and being around someone who I consider so deep and so present and so grounded. I was sharing how, many years ago, 15 years ago, I was part of the New York City paleo meetup group. And at one of our excursions, we went up to like Vermont to do like a hunter's education course. And here's someone who was also probably a second or third or who knows, fourth generation hunter. And I just like remember this guy being so deep and so present and so grounded. And something I'd shared in an article that I wrote for a blog was like, two of the most present, grounded there, like people that are there with you that I've met in my life are hunters. They're not the people that are going to like the bougie Bali retreat to meditate. Not that I want to knock that, but there's just something that comes from your life being like living in the silence and the quiet and nature and connecting with yourself and with the environment in a way that most people don't. And so like it can't not affect you. It can't not make you into someone that is like, I don't know, like just deep. I don't know how else to explain it. So if you want to comment on that, feel free.
Yeah, it's probably not the same for everyone. And that's why hunting, I think, still gets a little bit of a bad name, because there are people out there that are just, they're not going that deep. They're just using it as a way to prove something or, make a statement or whatever. But I think the people that are approaching it, truly and genuinely are experiencing exactly what you're saying, and it might take time to really get into that level. But that gets back to the whole point of why I'm doing this, why I stepped out of a somewhat secure, corporate engineering job to start a hunting school to try to help people have these experiences, because I felt it was so important and so critical to the well-being of our society and existence. If the economy crashes, it's going to suck, but if the ecosystem crashes, it's all over. So I think that connection to nature, to land, has really been stripped away recently. And it's not like it's just a side effect of hunting that I feel so connected to the land that I want to be a good steward of it. I feel like it's my home, and it's you know, and I think like I said, my wife was a vegetarian, and she's been a long time Vipassana meditator. And I would joke with her like, "Well, hunting is kind of like a walking meditation." And I said,
Mhm.
"Yeah, whatever. I've sat for 10 days in silence meditating. I know what meditation is." And so she finally geared up and went on a hunt with me, and she's like, I know what you're talking about now. This is very different and it's very unique. It's it's not just like looking in, but it's looking out, and like how are we connected to all this that's going on around us? How are we tapping into these energies and uh you know smelling and using all of our senses, and on top of that, there are things like mountain climbing that require a lot of skill and attention to detail, so you don't screw up and fall off the mountain. Um, and, hunting might not be that extreme, but what's different about it is you're going into the woods with the intention of killing something to eat it. And that kind of taps into something very different in our primal, spine. And all of a sudden it goes from being a observer of what's going around us to being a direct participant in the ecosystem. And I feel like that, for me, that's felt like I'm connected to something much bigger, something that I don't understand and can't explain, but it just feels good to be part of this ecosystem, that kind of came about long before I did and humans did, and just kind of being part of that. Um, I kind of forgot what the question was, but I get, yeah.
No, you
Yeah,
answered it.
you're good. I'm curious, like, what is your connection to, and how is the process for you, like, of the hunt? Like, obviously, you're not always guaranteed that you're going to get an animal, and yet you go through this process. There's some planning. You're out there in nature, and then out pops a deer or an elk. Like, what are those moments like? Like right before taking the shot, and then after. Like, can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion and adrenaline and who knows what, coursing through the veins at that point. I think it's tied up to our current and modern way of living and tapping into our ancient ancestral primal past. This idea of survival, got to get food to survive, even though we don't have to in this day and age. But I think it's tapping into that. And for me personally, I mean, I'll have opportunities to shoot things or I'll pass for whatever reason. On a 2-week trip, it just totally varies. But say, on a 2-week trip and 3 or 4 days into it, I have an opportunity to take a shot but something doesn't feel quite right, and I pause, I wait just a second or two, and that oftentimes that opportunity passes. And you maybe remember me telling you this in the story or at the course. It was a similar situation where I was hunting with my dad on that land right where we were walking years ago, where we came over a little rise. There was a buck standing down there in the bottom, and I was pretty young. He was right behind me. He said, "Go ahead and take the shot," and I put my rifle up, and I was kneeling, but I was too low in the grass, so I had to kind of get up a little bit, and I was unstable and shaking around, and the crosshair was bouncing around because you get what they call buck fever, just this huge spike of adrenaline, and as you can imagine, and my dad said, "Well, don't rush it if you're not ready." And I kind of took all the pressure off, and I took a breath. I pulled my rifle down and just sat there for a few moments, and then another buck came out and they started sparring a little bit and fighting, and then we just watched them for a little while, and they wandered into the woods, and that was it. And it, what it told me, what I learned there is that I never have to feel forced or pressured into taking a shot, either by a guide or somebody else or myself. It's something that, it's a very important choice and decision that we're making, to take a life of another big animal, and you don't want to do it poorly. You want to do it thoroughly and correctly, and so in my experience, it's just a matter of time. If I keep putting in time and commitment, eventually I'm going to get to a point where I have an opportunity, and everything is a go. It's like, yes, there's no hesitation. It just feels right. Sight on the animal, shoot or release the arrow, and it's done. So and even after 40 years of hunting, it's the same as practically day one, but I've learned how to anticipate it and live with it a little bit. But it's still that emotion and that adrenaline spikes beyond belief, and then afterwards, a lot of times the animal will run over a hill or into the brush or something, and you go up and recover it, and then there's this flood of emotion, like a second flood of like, okay, I did everything right. There's this sense of relief and joy and sadness and all these things combined. So it's very, it's not uncommon for people to cry when they shoot their first or many animals, and it's just a very emotional journey, I guess I'd say, and not something I experience other places quite to that level. You
Yeah,
shot your first animal at our course, Erasmus.
I did, and it was a squirrel. I'll get into that story. But my first experience of even just witnessing an animal to be killed for food was that weren't hunting per se, but we had a rooster that kind of went insane, and then we had to kind of put it down. And even just being there for that process, it was like this deep journey of, I mean, Sophie is the chicken tender of our family. These were her babies, and she made the decision that she wanted to, kill the rooster. And so even just leading up to that point, there was a very sacred aspect to it, and then taking the life, and it was definitely emotional. and then you continue with the process. And then, after a few hours, it starts looking like something that you find in the store. And so it's like this journey of, this is a living, breathing thing. You take its life, and then it turns into your food. And it was an interesting thing just to even notice in that moment. But more specifically, your course, it's not hunting season, so you shoot one of the goats that you have. And even me going through that process, you going out there, shooting the goat, seeing it go through its process, us being there as a cohort, putting my hands on this warm animal, like I got choked up. I got emotional. I mean, tears definitely came out of my eyes, because it's just, I love animals, I do. I love them. I respect them. And so, yeah, it's I guess it's each person. They have to go through their own journey on how they relate to this, but it seems to be common for a lot of people to have such a deep emotional um, response to it. I can't say I had the same exact one with the squirrel, probably because I don't love squirrels, especially living in Topanga and having our garden and our fruit trees. The first couple of years, those ground squirrels we're just taking our harvest. We're just taking out all the stone fruits. So like, I think I had a part of me that was like, fuck this squirrel, But being honest, like even that hunt, like that last morning, I think it was like the last 10 minutes, and we were gonna go back, and then it was like have the rifle, and I didn't even have a scope on that one. I think it was the iron sight that I did with that, and it just popped its head up, and then I pressed the trigger, and it was like I just saw it kind of flap around, and we walked over it. You sent me a little video this morning of the process, and it was definitely like an experience. I can't say it was the same that like I felt with the rooster or the goat, but it was still like wild. Like I picked it up, and then what we did is, Marco and we went back that night. I think it was, or the next day. I think it was that night. We actually like skinned it, and then we cooked the squirrel, and we ate parts of it. I wouldn't say squirrel's my go-to meal, but it was still like, I mean, what an experience to even to go through that, to take an animal's life, and then to even just skin it. I mean, the process of skinning a squirrel was like, it's like you're pulling off a sock from your foot. It was very interesting to even just witness that. Anyways, it was a great experience for me. The whole program, man. You done a wonderful job with the course. I felt so blessed that my friend Marco was able to come at the last minute. It really added a different element for me. We hadn't seen each other in 5 years, and he has experience hunting. We're still trying to figure out with his schedule when we can go out. It'll happen one day, but yeah, I mean, just to be in nature, just especially for myself. I mean, yes, I'm connected more to the land now with our garden, and it's important for me after being on devices all the time. But to be out there for 4 or 5 days with a good group of people, and be surrounded by you and your family, and it was a beautiful experience.
Yeah, this topic, I mean, it's a tricky one. It's life and death, and we've been kind of taught in society to death is a bad thing. And we often talk about, rather than taking a life during a hunt, we're giving death. We're giving birth, we're giving death, and it's just sort of part of the cycle. And there's also, I think, a factor of scale here. I capture and release spiders and things from the house, but say I don't do that necessarily for a mosquito. So I brush a mosquito is trying to bite me, that's killing something. And it's we don't think too much about it. But say maybe there's a mouse, and we step on the mouse. That's a little more significant. You hear it crunch under your foot or whatever. And then a squirrel, it's a little bit more, it's out there running around. You've got to stalk it and sneak up on it. And then a rooster, it's this bigger animal. You just kind of build that up to all of a sudden you're face to face with a horse-sized animal, an elk in the backcountry. And you can imagine that there's a lot more dynamics and a lot more going on. The Robin Wall Kimmerer, we maybe have mentioned her in the course, Braiding Sweetgrass, great book. And she talks about this idea that, food that you buy wrapped in plastic at the supermarket may fill the belly, but leave the soul hungry, or something like that. And so it kind of taps into this, it's just, there's all these different parts. Like there's this, I've got to kill something to eat it, or I become vegetarian, but then there's this debate of like, can we really be alive on this planet without causing some sort of death or displacement? Whether it's the mice in the field where they're growing the soy, or the clear cutting the trees to grow crops, it's uh, again, there's so many threads into it. There's another author who wrote a book called The Mindful Carnivore, and he went to school, progressive school, kind of got into vegetarianism and veganism, and then got out of school, and his wife, they were growing a garden. It's like, hey, we're going to grow all of our own food. We're not going to kill anything. We're not going to be meat eaters. And he realized that growing the garden, there were all these things, bugs eating their food, and then burrowing animals getting underneath and eating the roots. And they're having total crop failure, and they couldn't like kill the bugs because they didn't want to kill anything. And it's like, okay, just threw up their arms. We've got to go down to the local organic farm down the street and buy some produce because we're just not going to be able to produce enough. And then they came to find out that they were shooting deer that were coming in and eating their crops. It was collateral damage. So him just supporting this farm kind of was supporting the idea of killing things to create the crop. So he decided to take matters into his own hands, take responsibility for that death, and he started hunting. And it took him 3 or 4 or 5 years to finally shoot a deer, and it was a whole process. And now he's a very avid hunter. So it's really hard to like just compartmentalize parts of these lives, our life as a vegetarian or a meat eater, because it's just, there's so much going on, so much overlap and so many threads into all this stuff, that it's really about how connected are we to the ecosystem and nature, and kind of that unknown that I think is important. And hunting for me is the most direct connection.
How would you recommend people go about that like aren't hunters? The majority of the population, I guess, aren't hunters, and they do eat meat. So how would you advise someone to like maintain connection to the ecosystem and to nature and to the cycle of life and death in, I guess, urban areas?
It's tricky. I mean, we've come a long ways in a short period of time from where we were not that long ago. So it's not like we can flip a switch and just all become hunters all of a sudden. Now there's a sentiment, I think, with other hunters that they're a little bit protective, that they don't want other people to come into hunting because it's more competition for a dwindling resource, which is kind of true on the surface level. But if we dig deeper, a lot of wildlife conservation over the decades has been from hunters who, often love animals, but are out there killing them too, which is hard for some people to wrap their heads around. But the kind of the conservation, the wildlife management movement and funding, a lot of it comes from hunting. And another way to look at it is like, okay, if we have more people, it just means that, we want clean water. They're going to drink more water, and what are we going to do? Privatize it, or it's going to be more strain on our clean air. We can't have more people breathing. But it kind of comes down to what we value, I think. And if we're valuing clean resources, clean water, clean air, we're going to figure out a way to maintain that. And it's the same with wildlife. And kind of getting back to your question is like, how do we tap into that? And what do we do if we're living in the city and a million miles away from hunting and have no family and friends? It's not an easy process, which is why there are very few, programs doing what we're doing. The vast majority of money in hunting is around guided and outfitted trips. And a lot of times that's, the guide is doing the hunting, the client is there paying $5 to $50 grand to shoot something, and they're, that's an experience, but it's a very, very small part of the whole experience. They're taking a shot, but they're not really doing the hunting ahead of time, or a lot of times they're not even doing the the work that needs to be done to process the animal afterwards. So I don't think I would recommend just going out and hiring a guide unless you found someone that would walk you through the process. Obviously, you know, taking 5 days to go through a course like ours is a big investment in time, and it's not something everyone can do. But we are working on some online resources to address that. But you know, I think just starting to read some literature about these ideas, about people's experiences helps. We've got a list of books on our website. You know, gardening or farming or getting to know some farms. I mean, I was at the Ballard Farmers Market yesterday, put up an information table just to talk to people about what we're doing. And it's amazing how many people come out of the woodwork and like, what's going on here? I want to know. I've wanted to know how to hunt for years. I just don't know where to start and don't know what to do. And you know, inevitably we always get someone saying, how is this received in a place like Seattle, which is very progressive, and surprisingly we've had little to no pushback at all. It's just all been positive, genuine curiosity, like, what, you know, I want to learn more about hunting. So that's the tough part. It's not an easy journey. Yeah, but I think it's something that when people are ready for, you know, it's kind of embarking on a lifelong learning process, which it has been for me. And even after 40 years, I'm learning something every time I go out there.
Yeah.
So it's not a very good answer to your question.
Well, I mean, it comes down to
But
the
yeah,
values, like you said, a person's values. I mean, like, if someone wants to learn and connect more in that way, great. And if not, I mean, you know, there's a lot of different ways to live. And but for me, as someone who eats meat and chooses to eat meat, I keep asking myself this question, like, how can I get a little closer to it? How can I know more? You know, like even having evening eggs. Okay, we have chickens. We make our own eggs. I mean, we don't make our own eggs. The
Wow.
hens lay their eggs. Hens lay their eggs. Like, oh, fruits, vegetables. Like, there's just different levels of connecting more to the land. And you know, you said something when we were talking, I think, that really landed. It hit me hard. Where you said, you know, most people hire a hitman for their food, for their meat, and it just landed. And I get it. I'm not sitting here saying, oh, how dare you go to the store and buy meat, you know, but just the reality of that we're just like, oh, I don't want to see death. I don't want to be around death. I just want the neatly packaged thing that I'm going to throw on my grill and then eat it. It's just interesting to think about. You know, I'm not sitting here saying one's more right than the other. It's just we have come a long way from how our ancestors lived and connected to the land. And it's just a matter of recognizing that and sitting with that. It's not about, oh, everyone that lives in New York City, you need to sell your apartment and go move to Montana. It's not that. It's just having the awareness,
Right.
you know, and the knowledge. And then ultimately you're going to choose based on your life and your values on how you want to move forward and how you want to live your life. But I just think having the knowledge and the understanding, like, hey, I am taking a life. Someone is taking this animal's life. Where does this food come from? How is it nourishing me? Like, even just to ask yourself those questions, to contemplate, I think brings a person in deeper connection with themselves and nature.
I agree. You know, it's fascinating to hear so much pushback, you know, from various channels about how cruel hunting is, when, you know, the people saying it are often meat eaters. You know, why don't you just go to the store and get your meat? It's so much cleaner. But it's also pretty impressive at the, you know, what the commercial meat industry did to make this change so quickly and so deeply. I mean, they've made it easier on the people at the expense of the animals' lives to eat meat. And you know, that the commercial meat industry is a whole nother topic and story as well. But I see it as kind of a journey through something very difficult. Like, okay, I'm eating meat. Where is it coming from? Okay, now I know where it's coming from. This is not the best news. And it's like getting through these steps and like starting to take responsibility for our actions and learning more. And like, okay, if I'm really going to do this, am I going to start raising animals and butchering them, or going and volunteering at a farm, or getting to know the farmer, or am I going to start hunting? And that's kind of I think the end of the line is hunting natural food. I mean, I wish that we could just say, okay, we value healthy ecosystems and wild food, and convert all the developed farm grounds and well, not all of them, but a lot of them into healthy wintering grounds for animals, and boost the wild populations. And rather than fighting the system so much, just promote a healthy ecosystem, and be able to go out shopping by going hunting whenever you need food, which is, I think, what humans did for the vast majority of our existence. And you can imagine the feeling of just self-confidence that can come by looking out at the land and saying, I have the ability and skills to go out there, find food, and bring it back and feed my family. I can turn that deer, that antelope, into steaks and start a fire and cook that and feed my family. Where I don't think people get that same satisfaction by, earning money to purchase a steak wrapped in plastic to bring home, which gets back to that, what those participants were sharing earlier on. So it's, again, I think I'm rambling a little bit on a tangent, but it's a journey, and I'm a little bit, I don't know, concerned about the future of hunting, I guess the future of mankind, human society in general. But it's hard because less than 5% of the US public hunts anymore. And so it's sort of a dying art. And there has been a little bit of resurgence. There's been a food movement, food awareness movement, which has helped, I think, come back to shine the light on where our food's coming from. But there's just so much momentum, going in towards, I think one of our weaknesses as humans is that we're attracted to bright, shiny objects. And a lot of times those don't really fulfill us, so much as just doing the hard work and tapping into something bigger that's, been here and been around for a long time. And so I'm worried, but I'm hopeful, that people will start to want to re-engage and into the bigger picture of the ecosystem, and want to be be a participant in what's going on around them, and hands-on life and death situations. But it's going to be a long road to hoe, they say.
Yeah. Can you let us know like what your first hunt, meaning like the first time you actually killed a deer? Was it a deer or an elk? Do most people progress like from deer to elk, or it just depends on where you are? Like,
Yeah, it probably depends. I mean, there's way more access to deer around the country than there are elk, so it's easier to find deer, and they're smaller.
Because you said you were hunting like pheasant and other animals, but like the first time you actually hunted a deer, when was that?
Oh, those were early teens. I'm trying to remember if it was a deer or an elk that I first shot. I remember my first elk I shot, I was 15.
Uh-huh.
And my dad and I were hunting in some open country and going over ridges, and I spotted a couple animals over one ridge, and I was pretty young and trying to, make sure I was doing everything right. And I called him over and said, "You better make sure these are elk, will you?" And so we crept up over the ridge and looked down at the bottom, 100 yards down there, and there were these two elk bedded down, and they saw us and they jumped up and started running up the other side of the ridge. And he had a rifle with a set trigger, and he thought to himself, well, these animals get up to the top of the ridge right before they go over, I'm going to try to get a shot. But he wasn't going to shoot without letting me shoot first. So he set his set trigger, which makes a hair trigger on the front. This is not a very common thing, but because of that hair trigger, he was so excited, he just kind of put the rifle up and barely touched that trigger, and it went off and shot into the hillside. And then they started running up. And anyway, long story short, he shot one, and they got to the top, and I looked at him. I said, "Do we want two?" And he said, "Shoot." And I shot, and this thing took a few steps and tipped over, and I ended up shooting him right through the heart. And we walked up there and started going to work. And this is kind of the first really big animal I'd worked on. And he was watching me, and I was, cutting open the gut like we did at the course, the gutting process. And the difference when you shoot an animal through the pump house, the ribs and the lungs, they bleed out internally. So there's in an elk, there's a gallon or more of blood in the chest cavity. And so you cut that open, all this blood comes rushing out over you. And I just kept working away. And he was wondering if I was going to, have some sort of a fainting reaction. But it was just, I felt like I had a job to do. This is very natural. I was not thinking about, this poor animal or work deadlines or anything. I was just focused on being part of this process and doing a good job. And, it was just sort of a natural thing. And that's also hard to, I think, understand, is that I can sit back and out of context talk about, think about shooting an animal, killing an animal, giving death to an animal, and it might not feel quite right. It might feel a little bit barbaric or uneasy, but when I'm out there in the hunt, it's a very natural process. If I'm engaging in it fully. I think that's one of the hard things to understand is, and most people never have a chance to actually get to that point of being in the hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot going on, but there's a big feeling of, how it's a natural feeling and just kind of drawn into it.
Yeah. Would you say that, like, because there's so many conversations these days about, a lack of initiation for men, a lack of rites of passage from boyhood to manhood. Would you say that hunting made that transition easier for you and served as a kind of, rite of passage? And also, I don't know if this is the right phrasing, but it feels like many of us, particularly men, are disconnected from like that killer within, like that primal aspect that is capable of like taking life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I sometimes refer to it as like, what does it feel like, or what does it mean to be a natural predator? And that's not a great term in this day and age, I think, in society, but it gets to the heart of the matter. And it definitely feels different than being a consumer. And yeah, for me, it's really, I've had the opportunity to kind of grow up with this. So I felt like I was always engaged in it. And I think, for whatever it's worth, I was in relationships growing up and often got a comment like the women thought I was very masculine, and I wasn't really evoking that question or topic, but I think it was just my way of life, having grown up hunting, and approaching most of life through that lens. And I do think there's a pretty big rite of passage in all of this process too. It's what we did for many, many generations. It forces you to kind of look into the shadows and address things that are uncomfortable. And, it when done thoroughly and to completion, it provides something that you can survive on and that your family can survive on.
Yeah.
I do think that's what a lot of people are looking for when they come to these courses and they're wanting to get into hunting, is seeing that component.
I was just thinking, like, it's so crazy that like we need psychotherapy today to tell us what masculinity is. And we need courses and all the rest of it to tell us about masculinity and how to integrate masculinity as if it's this big psychological process, But all of that is only an emanation of this primal disconnection, it seems.
Yeah. What was that book? Ecotopia. Did you ever read that?
No.
I haven't, no.
I think it was written probably back around when we were born, and about today's modern era. And it was this idea that Cascadia broke off and seceded and became its own country, Washington, Oregon, Northern California, something like that. And there was this barrier, and I won't get into it too much, but they got back to basically the roots of living on the land, but they also realized that if life was too calm and simple, they were lacking certain things, and so they made these war games where they'd have two sides of men coming at each other with spears, and as soon as someone was jabbed with a spear, they'd end the game and like patch the person up and like go have beers together. But there was something about this act of like, this is a life or death kind of situation I'm engaging in, and it evokes different things. And I mean, it's just a story, but it kind of gets to the point of, and it also begs the question, like, does the past dictate the future? It doesn't necessarily do that. And maybe we're moving into a different time of history, but I do think there's a lot to our past that we're forgetting or covering up. And I think it's worth looking at that a little closer and seeing like what is there that is still valuable in this day and age to being a human being and being a man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You get a lot of father sons that take your course together?
Yeah, fair number. Actually, this coming next year, we've got 3 generations signed up for the first time, father, son, and grandfather. So that's going to be real fun. But we do encourage father, son. We try not to have a big group of kids because we keep it pretty serious and sort of the adult energy. So we kind of demand the kids step up to the adult level. Doing this for obvious reasons, but I do think it's a great opportunity for kids to experience this with their dads and moms. We've had moms and sons and daughters join us as well.
Yeah. Where's your favorite place to hunt? And where is there a place that you haven't hunted that is a dream for you?
Oh, I mean, the Rocky Mountains are, to coin a phrase in Jeremiah Johnson, something like the marrow of the earth or something like that. They're a pretty spectacular place, rugged. Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. We've hunted Montana a lot because my dad's roots there, and so we've been going back to the same spot for 20 years. And even then, I mean, this is I don't know, 30 square mile basin maybe, and hike up into, and it seems like every time there's something new to explore and something new to learn. So it's not like I'm dying to go someplace else. I don't really have a checklist like I got to shoot a zebra and a buffalo and this and that. It's again back more to the hunt. Like, what's the experience of the hunt? And I think it would be interesting to hunt with some of the people in Africa that are still living a very simple life, and learn some of those cultures and things. But it's not like I'm dying to check those things off the list. I do think Alaska, there's a lot of undiscovered, undeveloped country in Alaska, kind of the final frontier in our neck of the woods. We've done a little bit of hunting up there. I was actually up there for the 9/11 event, hunting caribou, which is a crazy story. But
I think you told some of that story. Can you share that?
yeah, I'll give you the quick version here. We flew up out of Seattle to Anchorage or someplace in a commercial jet, and had our rifles locked in these hard cases and locked and checked twice. And then we got into a smaller commercial airline, flew out to Iliamna, little burg there in Alaska. And then from there, we got into a Cessna and flew out to the tundra. And then from there, we got into a Super Cub. We were just one pilot and one passenger right behind each other, just a little frame, big balloon tires. And we got a rifle across our chest so the scope doesn't get knocked around. And the last thing they're worried about is terrorism there. It's more a problem with a bear attacking you when you land. And so we fly out to the middle of the tundra and they land in a really short strip. And I mean, just on the grass, and drop us off in our gear and left us for a week. And we hunted, and there's 4 of us. And I think that all 3, my dad, brother, and our friend, had shot caribou. I had missed one earlier in the week due to something I did wrong. And Tuesday rolls around and everything's quiet. Normally we're seeing bush planes fly over every hour or two. It's just it's just quiet, eerily quiet. And Wednesday, same thing. And I think we saw like a couple of fighter jets fly over fast. We're starting to wonder, like, what's going on here? I mean, is the weather really that bad? Or starting to count our matches and figure out how much. We're 80 miles from the nearest town with some major rivers to cross, which is not a good thing to do. And finally, I think Thursday rolled around. They opened up air traffic, and the folks that dropped us off flew over the camp and revved the engine, threw a note out the window with a rock and a plastic bag, just explaining the situation. Deer hunters, terrorists have hijacked 4 airlines and destroyed the World Trade Center and part of the Pentagon. The FAA has closed down all air traffic, and we're scrambling to get caught up. Just be ready when we come by. And so I was like trying to take all this in and understand it. But there was part of me that just wanted to get back out into the tundra and hunt, because that felt like a very natural place to be. And what was ironic was that I was at the time working for this structural engineering firm that did this structural design on the World Trade Towers. Even though it was way before my time, I was pretty closely connected to all this. So I went out and hunted, and snuck out and got into close enough to a string of caribou that were migrating through, and was able to get into position and get a shot and connected. And I went and field dressed this thing, and then hightailed it back to camp a couple miles before it got dark to get help packing it back and get my pack frame. And I got down in this little creek draw where my dad and brother and our friend were in one of the tents, kind of discussing the current events in the world. And they hadn't heard my shot. And my dad said something like, and I opened the door on the tent. They said, "Oh, don't worry, Bruce. Trip's come to an end. We got plenty of meat. We can always come back again next year." And I said, "We got work to do, boys." And strap on your throw on your boots, strap on your packs, and let's get going. And so I hauled them back out there in the dark across the tundra and the hummocks, and we packed this animal back. And I think it was a good metaphor, for we have work to do, in a lot of ways to kind of maintain our balance and symbiosis with our home. It's a balancing act, and hunting just provides a very unique opportunity to do that. And it is kind of ironic, because people say, how can you love animals and love wildlife and the land and go out and kill something? But it's when you dig into it, you realize that it's exactly that. And there's something about it that just makes me feel like I'm part of all of that, rather than a bystander consumer.
Yeah. No, I mean, just in listening to this, there's part of me that deeply craves these experiences and wants that, and feels kind of, I don't know, a little bit like hopeless in having that experience as like a, properly integrated part of one's life.
Yeah, it feels like a big step, especially in these stories that tell you. And maybe another quick story here while we're on the topic. It was 2 or 3 years ago. We were packing into our typical Montana hunting location, but there was so much snow that we couldn't get to the end of the trail, and everybody bailed. There's nobody back there even part of our hunting party decided, we can't get back and do what we normally do, so we're gonna go hunt deer for a while and go home early. And my wife Sarah and I decided to stick it out, and we drove as far as we could, and then we packed and sledded in to the end of the road where we normally start, and we set up camp there. And there was a lot of snow. We were the only ones back there. We were in the sort of a river draw, and the next day we hiked. We saw some elk way up high on the way in, and so we were hiking up, climbing 1,000 feet or more up around onto this ridge, hoping we'd get up to where they were, maybe shoot one and could drag it down that slope back to camp. And we get up there and up and over into a high basin, we see some elk, which is a long way from anywhere. And my first thought is, these are too far to deal with. We'll be back here all winter trying to get this stuff out of here. And I sort of jokingly turned to Sarah and said, "What do you think? Should we go for it?" And she's like, "Yeah, let's do it. A bird in the hand. And we only had a couple of days left in the season, and she didn't realize what we were getting into. I was like, "All right, let's do this." And so we dropped over the edge through the timber, trying to close about a 600-yard gap between us and a herd of cows. Where we hunt, we could shoot cows or mature bulls, but no spikes, young bulls, just the regulations there. And we get about halfway through, and this, the shady north side of the timber, wading through waist deep snow and over down trees. And we look over across this deep ravine. We see a bull step out of the broken timber about 200 yards away, which is a reasonable shot. And I hunkered down and got a good rest on the side of a tree and squeezed, and the elk just kind of stood there for a second and turned a little bit, and I felt pretty good about the shot. And then after about 5 seconds, it just started running straight downhill and almost like a free fall. This was a really steep, double diamond kind of a ski slope, and it ran and lost consciousness. That had been shot right through the lungs. It was draining, bleeding out, and it losing consciousness. And it ran into a tree and broke its antlers and broke its skull. Later found out, as it lost consciousness and started sliding down and bounced off another tree and slid down and hit a tree right before it went into the crevasse of this draw. And Sarah looked at me and she said, the other part of the story is that we had just, a few days earlier learned that she was pregnant with our first. So, Maya was in utero during this hunt, and she said, excitedly said, "We're going to feed our baby elk this year." And so we dropped down and climbed through this snowy draw and up the other side and got to this elk, and it's like 3:30 in the afternoon, and okay, we got to get to work on this thing. And it's freezing and snowy, and we just started working, getting this, got it opened up, gutted, pulled the skin off, started pulling legs off, cut all the meat off the carcass, set it in the snow, eventually got it in game bags, got the legs up in the trees as much as we could, then got the loose meat, which was 100 pounds or more, at the base of the trees with branches over them, and put a handkerchief or some human scent there to kind of keep the predators at bay. And we thought, well, this is well after dark at this point, and we said, let's each take a front leg, a shoulder, and drag it down the creek, the drainage tonight. Still 3 or 4 miles back to camp. And we'll try this. And we went about a quarter mile and realized it was just impossible. The trees and the snow, we were up to our bellies in snow. And so we hung those up, climbed back up the ridge, and dropped back 1,000 feet to camp well after midnight, had a meal and got the fire going and relaxed a little bit, and then, pulled our mummy bags over our faces. And I woke up the next morning after daylight, and I started trying to figure out if I'd had a dream or if this was reality, and kind of waking up to reality and think, oh my gosh, is this the first time I'm going to have to leave some of the animal in the back country because it's so far back there? And we're at the end of the road. It's snowing and blowing, and more of that road between us and getting out is getting drifted. And so we might get stuck, without some major shoveling or equipment to come in and open the road. So I'm thinking this the whole time. We strapped on our gear and got back up there, a couple of sleds, started ferrying loads of meat up out of the basin onto the ridge into the sled. We're about 3/4 of the way done, and we heard a pack of wolves howling down and around where the elk was, and luckily they were not coming in close enough. But for a minute there, I think Sarah thought we might be having to deal with a pack of wolves, but that's another story. Typically, they're not going to harm humans. We just kept at it, and she was helping out. She was packing meat up, and then we got them up on top, and then getting down over the other side got steep, and we're holding these sleds of weighing a couple 100 pounds of heavy meat and bone, and try not to let them get away from us, and eventually get them down to the creek, the river bottom, and have to ferry them over these rocky cliffs and back into the sleds, and then back across a little bridge and a couple miles out to the rig. It was after dark again. We got it all loaded up. Say it's snowing and it's blowing. We better move this rig out another few miles so we don't get stuck in here tonight. So we do that. We're dead tired. We're melting snow to drink. We're thawing out cans of sardines to eat on crackers, whatever we can. We're thinking, should we just sleep in the car tonight? Should we try to go to town, which is 2 or 3 hours away, and still maybe we get stuck in a drift and then really screwed? No, we got to get back into camp. So, it's dark and snowing and our tracks are covered. We work our way back up 3 or 4 miles to where we're camped. And the storm broke that night, and we got up, broke camp, put everything in the sleds, sledded back out another time, and with all 4 chains on and everything loaded up, we hit a few drifted parts of the road with a lot of momentum and just barely plowed our way through and got out to the main road and had a sigh of relief. But it was harrowing. And when we got out another hour or so to the nearest town, we stopped and went to a gas station rest stop, and I walked in, and someone at the front counter asked if I needed anything or said hello, and I said hello back, and I almost didn't recognize my voice. It was like a wild animal speaking. It was really interesting, and but it's the feeling I get every time I come out of the back country like that. It's just, I feel like a real human being, really grounded and really firing on all cylinders. And that's part of the magic of what I'm hoping people will experience on whatever level it is. And granted, some of that fades after a while, especially if I'm going back to work in an office, but it doesn't fade completely. And it's just sort of every time it kind of builds a little bit more and builds it more and builds up a base and something you can kind of tap into whenever you need to or wherever you want to. And I think some of that's just being out hiking around the mountains all day, doing what we were designed to do with legs and upright eyes. But I would never put myself through that much strain, I exercising all day just to exercise. But it was the hunt that was drawing me into it, and working my mind and my senses and all the things combined together is sort of like the perfect human activity.
Yeah. Wow, man. What an incredible story. Your wife sounds superhuman as well. I'm curious, what does an experience like that do for the relationship?
We joke that rather than going to marital counseling, you should just go hunting together. Because I guess it would either make you or break you, because it's it can be stressful, but with a little bit of teamwork, pretty soon you realize that you're relying on each other, and you can rely on each other, and you can trust each other. And when times get hard, you just dig down and get through it. And getting out of there in the dark and hiking back in the dark, and I knew that we both had the grit that needed to get through really hard situations. And so we'll often refer back to these trips, and we say, remember the area where we go. I'm not going to say it because it's a secret spot, but remember the Montana hunt, sort of, is what we say. And it kind of, everything else kind of fades away. It's like, yeah, we can get through some pretty hard things. What we're dealing with right now is not anywhere near as hard as what we've been through in the past. Yeah. And I think it's I think it's a good premarital activity and postmarital activity too.
I love it, Bruce. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for sharing your stories. Can you let our audience know how they can learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, well, our website is pretty detailed. Like I said, I'm an engineer by trade, so it's probably too detailed, but humannaturehunting.com. We are on Instagram under the same name, I believe. But I think our website's going to be the most descriptive. And like I said, we're working on an online course that might interest people who don't have as much time or flexibility uh, to take time off to invest in something like this, but still trying to tap into these fundamentals and help people kind of get closer, to that end goal. So we'll have a page on there for to learn more about that as well. And if you're in the Seattle area, we occasionally show up at the Ballard Farmers Market and talk with folks. We're most of the time over in Kettle Falls, which is Northeast Washington, and is far from a lot of where a lot of people are. And also just happy to chat with people about, this thing. There's an opportunity on our website to book a short call with me, and we can explore what people are looking for, and whether our course is the right thing, or if there's some other approach they could take to get to where they want to go. It's really the end goal here is to help people reconnect to nature and strengthen that bond, that human nature connection. So I think it's going to be beneficial for all of us.
Amazing. I do want to add one thing too. Bruce, you built your log cabin on your own with a little bit of help. The one that the course was held at, correct?
I did, yeah. Yeah, that's also a great experience. We've been wondering if we should add in, cabin building and timber framing courses at our place, maybe someday.
That's cool.
Amazing, man. Bruce, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's humannaturehunting.com and at humannaturehunting on Instagram. We'll have both those links in the brief for those listening. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
All right. Thanks, guys.
It's so incredible, man, to think about like the different lives that we all lead. Like no two lives are really the same. And especially for those that, I guess, follow the path of their innermost feelings and innermost passions, the authentic path, as we may call it, where that leads one is just such a unique place. And like Bruce has experienced things that I will probably never experience in my life to the degree that he has experienced them and witnessed them and has been impacted by them. And, likewise, the same can be said for how he might relate to me. But there's so much to do and so much to experience. Yet it feels like we pick our path and, everything else kind of has to take a back seat at times. Obviously, life happens in phases and you don't know what to expect, but it's curious, that's for sure.
Yeah, and again, like we talked about in the episode, like, we get clear on our values and what matters, and we do our best to live according to those values and the priorities in our life. And obviously someone who's grew up a grandfather that was a hunter, a father that was a hunter, that's going to have more of an impact for someone than like hunting had, no place in one's lineage.
Yeah.
But what I really loved with Bruce, and obviously I feel like he represents a lot of stuff we talk about, like, do you answer the call? Here's someone who, had a path. He was successful in his engineering, but there was something kind of like knocking on the door of his consciousness, that itch that he was like, I want to spend more time around this. Like, sure, I go on a hunt here and there, but then I'm back in the office doing my thing. But like, can I take this passion of mine, this thing that I really love, and can I make a business out of it? And he did. I mean, when you go up to their place in Kettle Falls, or right outside of Kettle Falls, like, it is stunning. And like you mentioned at the end of the episode, like, he built the log cabin on like a bunch of acres. Like, it's stunning there.
Yeah.
And to be able to welcome people into your home and to guide them and educate them on something that so viscerally,
Incredible.
like, it's so amazing, and it really was an incredible experience. But as with anything, like, you have the experience, and then what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Do you then go, oh, let me take the next step. Let me go out on a hunt. Let me be out in the wilderness, and see what happens. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really great. Ever since when I met Bruce, I was like, oh, there's something about him, something deep and beautiful about the life that he lives, and I'm happy that we had a chance to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure, man. With that being said, if you are seeking the virtual wilderness,
That's funny.
Threads of the Truth is a great way to test the bow of your mind and test your mettle in deep conversations and just get deeper into self-knowledge and dive deeper and sink your teeth into some of these topics that, we'd love to discuss here on this podcast. Members will be completely capped at 200. And so we'd love to see you come through if you're down, if you resonate, if you want to be challenged, and, if you want to laugh with some of the best people that we know, here for thetruth.com/FOTT. See you next time.